Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar all about beginning bird photography. We are so excited to have you join us to learn more about photography from our guest today, Susan Evans. My name is Sarah Halson. I am the program coordinator for Detroit Audubon, an organization dedicated to fostering the appreciation and conservation of birds and the environment that we share. We could not do the work we do without our funders and members, so I wanted to thank those of you who are members and supporting all of our projects. Some quick Zoom housekeeping before we begin today. You are able to control your video and microphone in the bottom left of your screen. We ask that you keep yourselves muted so that we do not receive feedback from your microphones. You can see closed captioning today by clicking on live transcript on the bottom of your screen if you need. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please be sure to add any questions you might have to the chat. We are also recording the webinar today, and it will be shared via email in the next week or so you can also find that on our YouTube channel. If you have any further questions, please reach out to me and I will do my best to assist you. Now I'd like to introduce Susan. She started her photography career at the age of 8 as a darkroom helper for her father, who was a wildlife biologist, avid Audubon member, and assistant director of Intermountain region of the USFS. Since then, Susan Evans' formal education yielded a BFA in both photography and holography from Goddard College and an MFA cum laude from Cornell University. Evans is an associate professor of art at Oakland University in Michigan, where she teaches photography. Her work is shown nationally and internationally, and it is included in many collections, including the George Eastman House Museum, Detroit Institute of Arts, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Museum of Fine Art, Houston, Musée de Lausanne, Switzerland.
Lausanne.
Thank you. Galerie Lichtblick, Köln, Germany, and Collection Dancing Bear, among others. That was a tongue twister. Thank you so much and welcome, Susan.
Hello. Great. So what I'm going to do is, just to get started, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Hopefully that'll come on up. Yay. I wanted to thank you guys for being here, everyone, for taking time out. I was looking at the chat. It looks like everyone's coming from all over. So thank you for taking an hour with me today. And I also want to thank Detroit Audubon for having me and hosting this event. Okay. Just a little quick note here, unless specifically captioned, none of these images are my own. They've been sourced from my father or culled directly from the internet, and specifically to illustrate the points that I'm going to bring up here. I don't hold the copyright for any of these images. So if you happen to see one of your images here, please know that the usage is limited strictly to this educational presentation. Okay. Okay. So it's generally understood that the Curtin brothers were the first wildlife photographers, and that they're from Yorkshire, and that was approximately 1892. The first Black photographer, wildlife photographer, is Robert Alexander Gilbert. Now, he was unrecognized at the time, but he was the field assistant for ornithologist William Brewster. And that was from 1896 to 1919. But I want to introduce you to Jean Stratton Porter. She's the first woman wildlife or photographer / naturalist. And ultimately, she was an author, and she would write naturalist columns, but she super hated all of the images that were accompanying her stories. So what she did is she got this camera and started taking her own images. And the reason I bring her up is that I would like for you guys to look at that little brownie camera. It's ultimately a box with a hole in it. There's no lens. And so you don't necessarily, and then that's her image on the right. So you don't necessarily need to be like really like these guys to get good bird images. And keep in mind that I can't see you guys. So if I start laughing at my own jokes, just forgive me, okay? You don't have to to go to this extent to, you know, get good images. I really love this guy in camouflage over here. Well, I'm going to go through and kind of talk about the basic gear and talk about then the basic skills that you're going to need. Now, you have your camera, your lens, stabilization, weather protection, and then post-processing. The camera and the lens are going to be a little bit more important depending on what your goals are. Wide variety of what's available, okay? Some people use their smartphones. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know,
Susan,
yeah.
I'm sorry. We're just getting a little feedback on your microphone, like something's covering.
Is that better?
Is that better? So I think so. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know. Do I need to go back?
I don't think so. It was just cutting in a little bit. I think you're good. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry about that, everyone. And so you have, you know, something that you need to kind of know what your goals are, right? So for snapshots or, you know, personal enjoyment, maybe even bird identification, either the smartphone or the super zoom, which is noted in the middle, is totally perfect. You don't need anything more than that. If you're wanting to take your images to a whole other level, then you potentially are going to want to go with a DSLR image, you know, which is pictured on the right, and don't necessarily follow the brand names that I have here. These cameras come in a variety of brands and a variety of price points. And so don't feel like you have to use these examples. Again, I'm just using examples that I found. There is a very big difference of quality between the different cameras. I'm kind of showing here an outline, or, you know, kind of a breakdown between them. So if you look on the far left, you have your smart camera, and your smart camera is going to give you completely adequate images. I mean, look at that. You know, this was my uncle's photograph of animals in his yard. And, you know, we have detail, we can identify them. This is perfect. We can remember that they're in our yard. The image in the middle, and you can see is copyrighted here by Brian. This is taken with a smart zoom camera. And, you know, the bonus of the smart zoom camera is that it is, you know, a little more lightweight. It's got a fixed, you know, lens on it generally, which is a variable lens. It's not as expensive as the digital, the DSLR there on the right. You have, you know, yeah, it's lighter. And then we have our DSLR there on the right, and notice how crisp, sharp those images are. So if you really want to take your images to the next level, the DSLR is going to be the way to go, because you're just definitely going to get a sharper image. You're going to have larger files. You're going to have more options as far as your optics go. You'll be able to interchange lenses. You'll be able to work with larger file sizes and potentially file types that are going to give you better detail. We'll go into that a little bit later, so don't be stressed if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you compare the image on the right, which is super fine sharp, with the image on the left, you'll see a very dramatic difference, right? And so I just kind of want to point out then that the Lumix that's mentioned here, so the super zoom camera in the middle, that's going to give you a good starting point. I would suggest for any of you guys who are potentially starting out or using your phone but want to go to another camera but aren't sure what to do, I would suggest the super zoom. It's got a lot of options. It's going to give you better exposure options. It's going to give you a manual setting. It's going to give you preset settings versus any manual camera app that you might find for your smartphone. And so just in case this wasn't enough, I wanted to show you guys some examples. Some examples that my father took with his super zoom camera of feeder birds. And so we have, you know, this lovely northern flicker here on the left, and we can see the little soot thing. And then we have our red-winged blackbird, and as my dad would say, it's singing. But notice how sharp and how crisp.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Susan, to interrupt you again. It's just still cutting in that microphone.
Okay.
And I know you had mentioned headphones, so I didn't know if that might.
I don't know. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed.
Or some paper or.
How's that? Is that working?
Yes, that sounds much better. Thanks.
No problem. I'm, and I now have mowing going on outside my window. So, okay. So point being is that here, we have the smart zoom camera, close-up images. If you're planning just to shoot birds in your yard or at your feeder, this is a great camera, the super zoom, because you can capture them very easily. Here's a couple more. I wanted to show different lighting situations. These are more that my father has taken, just to show you that it handles exposure. The super zoom camera handles exposure very well. Okay, and then also wanted to point out that these kind of cameras are especially good for photographing other types of wildlife too. So these are more images that my father has taken. Okay, an alternative would be to install a feeder camera. And I have not worked with a feeder camera in my own yard, but I hear they're incredibly wonderful. The only thing with the feeder camera is that you are limited to the kinds of birds based on the ones that actually go to your feeder. You can get all different kinds on Amazon. They have all different kinds. You can also get what's called a GoPro. And this is something that's a little bit more portable that you could potentially take with you, put it in the field, and then come back or, control it remotely with your computer or phone from a distance. So this is a great way to get up close and personal with your birds. This would also actually be a really good way of tracking the birds or doing bird counts in your yard, because you would be able to see, you'd have an actual view of the ones. Okay, here are some key skills that you guys are going to need. And I point these out because they are the most important skills. You'll hear, if you go online, you'll see all sorts of different videos and blog posts, but these are going to be the most important skills. And I'm going to tell you, number one, the very, very most important skill is to know your gear. Okay. The absolute worst time to figure out how to operate your camera is when you're in the field trying to make a photograph. Okay. So definitely you're going to miss the shot that you want to take if you're trying to figure out how to work your camera. So this may be a little bit of homework, all of this here, but you're going to need to know your gear. That will help you make better decisions on the fly, and you'll get the shots that you need. Lighting. You're going to need to understand a little bit about how it affects your subject matter. I'm going to show you a little bit about that, all of these. I'm going to show you a little bit about how to manage them. So don't worry. One thing that I cannot say enough, patience. These birds are not in a zoo. And so you can't expect them to do the exact most perfect thing in the universe the first shot that you take. So you may need to wait for the right timing. You may need to wait for the right lighting. You may need to wait for the right angle or activity, depending on what the bird is doing. And so patience is key. And while you're being patient, it's really important to kind of study your subject matter. By studying your subject matter, you're going to see how the bird moves, how it eats, how it communicates with the other birds, how it handles its habitat. And in doing so, and in learning these things, you're going to figure out the very best time to take a picture. You're going to figure out when the bird is doing something interesting or photogenic. And so anticipation is really key, being able to anticipate the activity of the bird, while it's happening. And then the last thing, which is super important, is composition. I can't tell you enough. The difference between so-so images and fabulous images is composition. And this goes from anything between snapshots to very high-end, you know, fine art photographs that you're buying in galleries. And so composition is key. And I want to assure you and reassure you that, you know, the more that you practice taking pictures, the more that you do it, the more intuitive it will become and the easier it will be. Okay, so here is kind of the basics of what you should know about your camera. There are so many different kinds of camera brands and so many different kinds of controls that we absolutely just aren't going to have enough time to talk about them here. But this should give you a basic sense of the kind of things that you're going to want to know about your camera before you go into the field. So image quality, that's where you set the how large your image file is going to be, the quality of your image file. White balance, what kind of lighting are you using in the scene? Camera modes, some cameras have programmable camera modes, or if you're going to use it manual, how does that work? Some have different viewfinder options and what those different settings mean. You have different exposure settings, and you know, based on whether or not you're doing manual or, you know, program, you're going to want to know how to change those. My camera has different metering modes. A lot of cameras will have metering modes. You'll have spot metering, center metering, or kind of a matrix metering. You're going to want to know what your camera is using. That's way to get the best exposure. You're also going to want to know focus. Some images you're going to need to focus by hand. Does your camera allow for this, or are you always using, you know, autofocus? This is something that you need to know. Also, with some lenses, most usually longer lenses or Canon lenses, you have something that's called image stabilization. These lenses will automatically stabilize for you, and if you're actually trying to show movement, it's not helping, it's getting in the way, and you might need to focus that on your own. So you need to know about your focus. Image storage. So again, you know, if you're using a larger file type, you need to be able to track where you will know how many images you have left or how many images you have shot so that you can be preparing or aware of that. And you also need to know how to export your images. Again, we don't have time to go through all of these today, so I'm giving you guys homework. Granted, I won't be checking that, but if you know these things about your camera, it'll only make your time in the field making photographs so much easier. Okay. The one thing that I do want to point out from that list is file types. And on the right is a JPEG file type. And then on the left is a RAW file type. And the reason I want to point it out is because the larger file type, so the RAW file type, is way better. That's really a good qualifier, but it's better in that it's giving you more detail. And if you plan to do adjustments later in other applications on your computer, you're going to want that extra detail. And then the image on the right is a JPEG file. And this image is compressed, number one, but also notice there is no detail in the shadows, right? And so the problem is that if you were to go back in and try to adjust this image, there's absolutely no detail over here. There's nothing for you to get. Whereas over here in the RAW file, this is something that you can adjust later in one of the other editing apps, and it's going to be there for you. Okay, so I would suggest shooting in RAW. Another file type that you could try is TIFF. My camera phone, or the phone on my camera, I can do JPEG and then another kind that I've never heard of, or TIFF. And so you might have those options too, but I would try to stay away from JPEG if at all possible. Okay, camera lens. Okay, I also want to remind you of Jean Stratton Porter's camera. She had absolutely no lens whatsoever, but I'm sure in your experiences being out in the field taking photographs, you have seen these people. Maybe not them specifically, but people who have these kind of lenses on their camera. You don't need this kind of lens. Generally, if you're just shooting out the window, this is way overkill. This is not necessary. These kind of images would be considered a telephoto lens for getting super close or magnifying something that's really far away. And the disadvantage of these kind of lenses would be that they're very sensitive to movement, and you're going to want to stabilize them, which is what the woman on the very left is doing. And so just be really careful about thinking about lenses, thinking about what kinds of things you're going to be photographing and where you're going to be and what kind of gear that you need. So you don't necessarily need this in order to make good images. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about focal length, because I think this will help clear up some questions about, oh, what lens do I use? Okay, so the human eye sees at about the equivalent of 90 millimeters. Okay, and so I'm going to go right here and kind of point out 85. So this is our view right here. This is normally what our eye sees, not including peripheral vision. So any number, focal length, above that is going to be telephoto, meaning that it's going to restrict the angle of view, which you can see here. So we go from 85 to 100, it's getting smaller, but it's getting closer. So it's restricting the angle of view, but it's magnifying. But if you go below 90, you're getting wider angle. A lot of people like shooting in wide angle because it's expanding the area of view. And so if we think about 18 millimeters, oh, you can't see me. So 18 millimeters is about here, whereas 100 is about here, right? And so if you think about the lens, anything above 90 is going to bring things closer to you. Anything below 90 is going to broaden the view. Okay, and so again, think about what it is you're planning to shoot or what you normally shoot, and is it really necessary to have, you know, a 300 millimeter lens? There you go. You're going to want to think about stabilization. Now, stabilization is not to be taken lightly. As you can see over here, these women have super long lenses. They need stabilization.
I can't hear anything.
Really? Can everyone hear me? Someone else was saying they can't hear.
Yes, I'll check in with her.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. So stabilization, it's super important. So even if you have a small camera, you're going to want something to stabilize. This is really good in low light situations. It's really good in like weather, like if there's wind or anything. These lenses get really heavy. The optics in these lenses become really heavy, and it's hard to hold these steady because you're magnifying so much. Just the slightest little tremor is going to affect your image. So you're definitely going to want to have some stabilization. Now, if you're shooting out of the window of your house, you may not need a tripod or a monopod, which you can see here. You might be able to just prop your camera up on a table or a chair or a dresser. It may not be necessary, but if you plan on shooting in the field, you should definitely plan to have some sort of stabilization. And then I want to reinforce the fact that this is not considered stabilization, right? No, this isn't. So I don't want to see any of you out there trying to use selfie sticks as stabilization or using them to invade the space of any wildlife. No, don't. So there you go. All right. So when you get your stabilization, the very first thing that you're going to want to do once you pull it out and put your camera on top is level your tripod. Some of the higher end tripods, so for example, this image over here, this tripod probably has a built-in level, right here, and it's going to tell you when it's level. However, it's pretty easy to see. All you have to do is look for the horizon line, right? So you want to make sure that that is straight on. If you don't, you're going to get images like this. They're beautiful images, yes, but the horizon line is not straight and it's a little disorienting and not as strong as it could be. Okay, so definitely, level your tripod. Even if you're in a place that doesn't necessarily have a level ground, you can find a place where you can level it with the horizon line. Okay. All right, gear, packing and weather protection. Depending on where you're going and what your needs are, you have a variety of options. So for example, my father would use something like you would see over here. He has this neoprene case for his camera. It's going to make it more accessible, easily accessible. He can attach it to his the same kind of harness that he's using for his binoculars is kind of right all there. Whereas I like more of a pack. And so I carry a pack. Either one is right. You can also get a bag. It totally depends on what you plan to take with you and where you're going and what kind of system you have. So don't feel like there's a formulaic answer to this. Also, definitely be prepared for changing weather conditions. They make, special things that you can use for rain or for polar situations over here, but there are other things that work just as well. You don't necessarily have to be so particular and high tech. I've used trash bags before, so don't feel like you have to go out and buy a bunch of gear. I've also used a sweater before, so it can be as low tech as you want it to be. Okay, so this is a really good example of what not to do. You don't need to take in a bunch of junk with you, 50 million backpacks, and you don't need to carry every camera and lens that you own with you. Be mindful of what it is that you're photographing, where you're going to be when you're making those photographs, and try to plan accordingly. I think that this would be very uncomfortable to carry all that stuff around, and just imagine what it's doing to that poor man's back. Same to this guy. I worry about their spines. But again, don't be these people. Okay, post-processing. There are a bazillion post-processing applications, anything from, Photoshop, Lightroom, Bridge, all the way down to like GIMP and Photo. There's all sorts of free apps. And so, again, there's no time to like go into all of the different options here, but you have some serious options. So what you're going to need to do is know, this is kind of the part about exporting. How do you get this card to put your images into this computer? At Oakland University, we have Canon cameras, and ultimately they come with a cable that we can link our cameras directly to the laptop. And so you don't have to mess around with any cards. But this is something that you should know about your camera. It might be easier to just have cards, and that way you can switch them in and out on the fly. It's kind of up to you. Okay, so this is a link. We're going to put it in the chat, of an article that details a lot of free image adjustment or post-production sort of Photoshop-like applications that you can get for your computer. Keep in mind that there are going to be Mac and Windows versions on here, and if you are starting out or kind of midway through and don't know what kind of app that you want to get, or don't know if you really want to commit to Photoshop at this point, or Lightroom or Bridge, consider using one of the free apps until you know exactly what tools you're going to need and exactly what kind of adjustments that you make regularly. That way you'll be able to best identify the features that you want, because Photoshop may be just way more than you need. My dad uses Photoshop Elements, and that's totally enough for him. He doesn't need to have the whole Photoshop or Adobe suite in order to do it. So don't feel like you have to have the top of the line, most technical, perfect thing. You don't need that. Okay. Okay. So another really important thing you need to consider is lighting. And one of the lighting is my favorite thing in the universe. So you'll have to kind of go with me if I digress. But lighting is important in that you just kind of need to know how it's affecting your subject. You don't necessarily need to have all the technical wizard things that you learn. You just have to know how it affects your subject, color, the direction, and quality and intensity. So I'm going to go through these a little fast, but just because I have a lot, I want to show you guys. Okay, so morning, noon, and evening images. Notice how the color of the cardinal drastically changes, right? And so morning light is really considered sort of clean light. Everything's fresh and new and, kind of accurate. And then we have noon light, or midday light, which has a tendency to bleach out color, kind of overexposed. Look how contrasty the shadows are over here. Look how bleached out this flamenco is. You're really not going to get ideal photographs at this time of day. And then we have evening shots. This looks like it's just at twilight where the sun has just gone down, but notice how it really colors the sky and helps, objects really stand out. So definitely consider the time of day and how that's going to affect the subject. So depending on the color of bird or the place where you are, this may change many things. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about directional lighting. Okay, so as I move through these, I love puffins, so you're going to have to look at a lot of puffins here. I want you to notice how the light changes it. So this light is coming from above and behind. This light is kind of coming in from this direction. Here we have a top light. And how you can tell where the light is coming from is notice the highlights and notice the shadows. This is especially true here. This is going to tell us where our shadow is. And so the sun is coming down against that puffin, whereas here we can see our highlight here. So the light is definitely above this. Here we can see the lights coming in from over this direction. But notice it changes. Now, the quality / intensity is really important here. So we have more diffuse light on the left and more direct, intense, bright light on the left. And so I want you to see how soft the light is on the left versus how bright and intense the light is on the right. Yes, Susan, we see that. Okay, patience. I've already mentioned this once. You have to be patient. No bird is going to act out exactly how you want it to the minute you pull up the camera to your eye. And so this is another good point of having a tripod or a monopod, is that you can have your camera rest on this and have it ready to go and not actually be holding it. I don't know about you, but I get tired holding my heavy camera. So patience, this is key. Another one, anticipation. I've already mentioned this to you guys. If you know a little something about your subject, you're definitely going to be able to figure out when is the best time to photograph it. And if it's a new bird that you haven't seen before and it's quick and you have to just like get in there and get that shot, no harm, no foul, do it. But if you have the time and can spend a little bit of time taking photographs and composing your shot, you're going to get a better image. Okay, composition. This is super important. This is the last really important thing I wanted to bring up. Okay, so you have to consider, is this a snapshot or fine art? As I've already mentioned before, snapshots are perfectly fine. And they are completely acceptable. No harm, no foul. And if this is just for your enjoyment or to log the birds that you have seen, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these kind of images. However, with a little bit of composition control, you're going to up your game and you're going to make your images better. Whereas, the fine art image there on the right, it's much more considered and controlled. And so this isn't just I popped out and took this picture. It's a lot of time and effort went into this, though it seems effortless. Okay. Also online, you're going to find a bazillion rule of thirds formula. And even though I teach photography, I have only ever used the rule of thirds. And the reason for that is that it's so dynamic and it's so functional that I don't have to remember all that other stuff. But ultimately, the image is broken out into different parts. Okay. And so where these intersections are generally is going to be where you're going to want to put the area of interest. Right. And so kind of watch for those areas. You're also going to want to never, ever, ever put your horizon line right through the middle of the frame. It just breaks up your image in an unflattering, uncomplimentary way. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. And so also I want you to think about diagonals. Diagonals really make images dynamic. They move the viewer's eye around the frame, and that's going to help you gain interest and get people to stick in and look at your images. Okay, so here's an example of a really, really, really bad composed image. So not only is the horizon line through the middle, we don't know what the subject is, no one's doing anything interesting, there's no detail in the sky or in the sand. I mean, this is kind of pointless. Like, why bother? So please, please, please don't take images like this. Okay, another really important thing that you're going to want to pay attention to is fill the frame with your subject. Notice how all these pixels out here are wasted. Okay, if you really compose your image with the most important parts filling your frame, you're going to have better resolution, better detail, better sharpness. And this is especially important if you're going to want to print your image. Okay, so, you know, if in the end you plan on cropping all this out, it's total disservice to you. It's a waste of pixels. Please don't do this. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some practical tips. Growing up with an ornithologist father who took lots of bird portraits, I'm really used to looking at bird photography. And so I'm going to kind of share some tips that I learned over time with my dad with you guys. Okay, focus on the eyes. As with any portrait, people want to see eyes, and this should be the absolute sharpest part of the image, okay? You're gonna want to make sure that it's sharp, and this may be an adjustment with depth of field, which you can do. One thing that's important to know is that in order to connect with the viewer, they are looking for the sharpness of the eye. It makes it easier for the viewer to connect with the subject matter. I love this image over here, it's so good. But just so you know, connect with the eye. Another important thing, get a sparkle or highlight in the eyes. Look how dead and empty these eyes look versus these. This one adds more life and vibrance to the personality, gives it more of a sense of having a soul or actually having a vitality, whereas this just looks like cold, dark, empty holes. So you definitely want to get a highlight or sparkle. Here's another one. Get eye level with your subject. I know this isn't always possible, but getting eye level with your subject kind of puts you into their world in order to connect with them, which also then puts the viewer into their world. And so it's easier for people to make a connection with your subject, even if it's teeny tiny. I like looking at these little guys that he's eating, he's snacking. But you definitely want to get eye level. And that may mean that you don't just stand there with your camera and take a picture like this. That may mean you need to squat down, sit down. And then here's a lovely image of Ansel Adams taking images with his 4x5 camera of Yosemite. So all the famous photographs of Yosemite, he's kind of he's, you know, placed his camera on top of his woody here. So he's not actually out in the field as it might be suggested. But so don't just stand around. You're definitely going to need to kind of move around. You might need to move to the side, change your angle. The birds potentially aren't going to move. So kind of connect with the birds versus via moving around or any wildlife. Okay, here is an example where the camera angle might need to shift so that the animals actually have more personality. And you can notice that especially over here. You know, in order to show his personality, you need to see different angle. Okay, another one. The head tilted towards the camera gives a sense of more engagement and interest. It looks like this bird is actually participating in this interaction. Isolating your subject. There's many ways that you can do that. So here on the left is depth of field. Basically, you can use a small number aperture and a faster shutter speed, and that's going to blur out your background, which also simplifies your background, kind of letting the focus be right on your subject matter. This one is composition. Based on the composition here, we just move around the space. We kind of come in here, move around this way. So compositionally, that one's just really strong to keep us in the frame. Another way of isolating your subject is to use color. So notice how these colors stand out, you know, the color of the birds stand out so differently from the background. That really helps the viewer isolate and notice them and kind of pick them out as the main subject of the image. And especially here when you're using a shallow depth of field, this is also the most in focus. Again, shallow depth of field to isolate, you know, the bird and this beautiful, I think that's that plant or that tree, I can't remember. So anyway, isolate your subject with color. Another one is you isolate your subject with light or action. And so here we're using light so we can see motion, and here we're stopping motion so that we can actually see the bird, but the path of the bird. One of the last ones I'm going to point out is you need to separate your birds in flight, especially if you want to show the action of the birds. If you're trying to show the chaos of the situation, this may be more appropriate, but if you want to actually document the birds and get their silhouettes a little more plainly, a little more clearly, you're going to want to separate the birds. Okay, this, I know I'm talking to a crowd that probably already knows all of these things, but I just wanted to point out that the goal of wildlife photography, and especially bird photography, is to leave no trace and do no harm. Okay, so please respect all boundaries, fences, signs, and everything. If you're in a protected area, please stay on marked trails or paths. Read all posted signs. You're basically responsible for knowing what those signs say, so you might as well read them. And also, just kind of to the point, do not bait, trap, or handle wildlife if you're in the wild unless you have a specific permit or permission in some way. Okay, and permission being more than, oh, I want to take a picture. No, that's not good enough. You need to have something more than that. Okay, other quick tips. Definitely be prepared. Okay, so also know your limitations. How far do you want to go, and how much exactly do you want to carry with you? Okay, and these are going to help limit some of your other things. So also dress appropriately. Things change. We're not, I used to live in Colorado, and this was especially true there. But here in Michigan, that potentially can happen. If you're a little bit further north, things could get chilly. So always be prepared for a change in the weather. You're also going to want to stay hydrated and take snacks. I want to point out, remember patience, staying hydrated, take snacks. You can do both of those together. You might want to shoot in silent mode. Some cameras have that option. And definitely carry backup memory cards and charged batteries. And then one last point, if you're out during hunting season, definitely wear a reflective vest if you're off trail. Okay, so in the end, I don't want you guys to be these people. And basically, these guys are all getting the same shot. And I don't want you to be those. So experiment a little bit. And so I have some troubleshooting things here, but we're kind of running out of time. So I wanted to take a break maybe and find out if there were any questions before I move to this point. Sarah, have there been any questions?
Yes, yeah, we have a couple questions. One was asking if you were going to mention mirrorless cameras. That's not something I'm familiar with. Am I saying? Okay.
There is a new wave of mirrorless cameras, yes, and they can be very effective, or just as, if not more, in low light situations. Because in a way, it's just like having a bulb setting. I think it's just a matter of experience in using them. You can use them anytime. Yeah, mirrorless is fun. But a lot of the higher end SLRs, you can actually shoot mirrorless. So you wouldn't necessarily need to go and buy that independently.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question was if you have any tips for compensating for harsh midday light.
Okay, compensating for harsh midday light, that is a nightmare. So the best thing that I would suggest is change your angle. If you have light coming straight down from the sun, there's really nothing that you can do. There's no way, unless you have a whole set of bounce cards, to really change or alter that light. Again, I would kind of steer you towards just being patient or coming back at another time where the lighting is going to be more amiable. You can potentially do HDR, high dynamic range, and do a variety of exposures and then try to merge them in Photoshop. But that is going to take a lot of time and energy if you don't know how to do it. And I don't know if that's your interest, but yeah, midday light is difficult. So I would, those are my choices.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
The next one, why am I? Could you talk more about the diagonals concept?
Yeah,
for composition?
Sure. Diagonals. So let's just look at these images I have here. So diagonals, we move in through the frame. We kind of move up through here. Whereas, straight lines are very rigid and very grid-like. Diagonals kind of pull you through. You kind of start and then you go to the end. Even notice this one, going in a diagonal. We have this, they're kind of swimming is at a diagonal. They're in a diagonal or, a triangle as they're moving. The diagonal, what makes it dynamic is that it's making the eye travel. It's not the expected straight up and down. It's making you kind of work a little bit. But in that process, the viewer is discovering and actually becoming more of an experience for them. And so diagonals are what would be, or adding diagonals to the image would help it be what is considered dynamic because of that reason.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we're getting more in. What focus mode do you generally use in the DSLR?
Okay, yeah, that's hard. Okay, so I like to use autofocus mode, and most DSLRs have the option of autofocus lock, and usually what it is an extra button up by the shutter button is that you can aim your camera at the object or your subject matter, focus it, hold your shutter button halfway down, and then recompose, and then push the shutter the rest of the way down to take the image. That way you can have the focus you want, but still have the composition.
Great, thank you.
I'm just thinking, I only do manual focus if I'm shooting in extremely low light, or if I'm shooting something that has very minimal focus, like something in the fog.
Okay, good, thank you.
Mhm.
And what is your opinion of Canon with Zoom 45?
Hey, I'm a Canon user, so I'm all about Canon. I'm a sucker. The 45 lens is going to be a wide angle lens, and I like it. However, just so you know, there is some lens aberration, meaning that the center of your images are going to kind of have a tendency to bubble forward. If you look for wide angle lens distortions on Google, you're going to be able to see examples of this. So the center of your image will look like it's coming towards you. Now, another thing that's really great about the 45 is that you're going to have a very deep depth of field. You're going to have a lot of focus, and you're bending space. And so you're taking an angle of view that your eyes can't normally see because you see at 90, and you're giving it 50 more points basically. And so you're flattening a three-dimensional or a circular space, and that's really sort of interesting. I hope that answered the question, but feel free to hit me back if that's not what you were wondering.
Great, thanks. Someone asked how to compensate for a camera with no focal point, just a screen to see the picture.
I'm not sure what they mean, no focal point. That's impossible. Is this a camera phone?
Maybe that's what you're referring to, Linda. I would think so.
Okay,
No eye, no eye hole, so no.
Okay, yep. Okay, so if you don't have a viewfinder, especially if you're using a camera phone, you should be able to touch your screen. And by touching your screen on your subject matter, your camera will probably either select focus for right there, or select exposure for right there. In your settings option, you will have the option of changing that. I use Lightroom, and I also use Pro Camera on my my smartphone, which is a iPhone, and I'm able to set each one individually. So they're just different color squares. So you should be able to do that. On a camera that does not have a viewfinder, you should be able to have a mode. And I don't know what camera you have, so I can't tell you specifically, but you should have a setting where you're able to define that, because a lot of cameras like the Canon has different modes of focusing. So you can select areas where you want it to focus. It could be left side, it could be right side, it could be up, it could be down. So you're going to have to look through your manual. Hypothetically, if you don't have your manual, you can look online. If you Google your camera brand plus the model number and then manual, you should be able to find it for free.
Okay, yeah, she did clarify that it's the Canon Zoom 45.
Yeah, okay, Zoom 45. I'm not familiar with that one, so yeah, you better check your manual. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that one, Linda.
All right, and she also asked about making the camera less shaky without a tripod.
Oh, I know what you mean. Okay, so a couple tips that I've learned from my dad is that you can lean against something, okay, and he is a rock. He can just stand normally and just be solid as a rock. I'm obviously hyperactive, and so I have to lean against things. I have to sit down, I have to brace the camera, like I will put my camera against a tree and just hold it there, or a rock. If you are using a phone, that's easy. If you're doing it from inside, again, you can just use your table or a pile of books or whatever. It should be easy to stabilize. If you don't want to use or don't have a tripod, it's potentially difficult if you get out in the field, especially if you're working in low light. So consider that there are a lot of tripods that you can get online, even from Amazon, that are under $10, that are those small little tripods that you could get and that are extremely portable. But image stabilization is definitely a difficult one.
Thank you. Some good suggestions there. Someone said they shoot in both JPEG and RAW. Is this okay? I know it uses up a lot of space. Should I just use RAW?
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't care if you, I mean, it's totally fine. It doesn't matter what I think, but it doesn't matter if you shoot both JPEG and RAW. However, if you go into your RAW file and make image adjustments and exposure adjustments, your JPEG will no longer match your RAW file. And so my opinion would be to shoot only in RAW and then convert that to a JPEG later, because it'll give you a more accurate rendering. Like if you're planning to put something online, or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever, you'll have a more accurate version of the image that you've adjusted.
Great. Okay, and I believe these are the connected. In the focus mode, are you using a single area focus mode or continuous focus modes? Or is this the AFS or AFC type models?
Okay, I got it.
And using the vibration reduction VR on, is that connected to or off?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay. So the VR reduction. Okay. So that's basically the stabilization thing that I was talking about. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's not good. I generally just keep mine on because you can already figure out I'm a little hyperactive, and so it's just better for me. The other modes, I generally shoot in single. And if hypothetically I were shooting something like this one on the right, I might shoot continuous so that I can shoot like 40, 50 images of this whole entire event and then pick the best one. So I don't think there's any one correct answer. I think it's a matter of understanding your subject and knowing what's going to happen to making the best choice there. The other ones, or the other questions that you had, like single versus continuous, yeah. So I think I got that. But if you have another question about that, or I could be more specific, ask again.
Okay. I think that was it. Thank you. There's a reason I didn't do this webinar for sure.
Okay, so I was going to go through a couple troubleshooting images. Is that okay, Sarah, since we have a little time?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So I wanted to address some general issues that people have when they're taking wildlife photographs. And keep in mind, I just learned yesterday that there is a Facebook page for bad wildlife photographs. And I wish I had known that before I made this lecture, because I would have stolen some of the images from there. But here is troubleshooting number one. Never, 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 never get this close to your subject. This is absolutely bad. Okay. And this guy is, kind of bragging about this, but this is absolutely the worst thing that you could do. The idea is to keep wildlife in the wild. So please never get this close to your subject. Okay. How many times has this happened to you guys? Yeah. Okay, a lot, Susan. Okay, so basically what's happening is that your camera is focusing on something else, generally the background, and not the subject. Alternatively, this subject could be closer than what your camera can focus at. And so it looks like it's too close, and so it's not able to focus. Another problem with this image is notice how grainy it is. So this is a very low resolution file. So this could be a JPEG file, or it just could be a bad, low resolution file. But just know that your camera, no matter what focus setting that you have, is that you have to be able to focus on your subject, because this was not the subject of the image. It was this little guy right here. Okay, here's another example of an absolutely terrible photograph. And again, if these are yours, we're here to learn. And so this is a safe space. The problem with this one is direction of light. The exposure is bad. We don't have good color on our little guy here. Notice the highlights are completely blown out. The best exposure is actually in the shadow. So this is super overexposed. And so we're not getting the color of the eyes, and we're not eye level. We're looking down on it. So we're not really getting an optimal view. Another thing I might throw out here is that this object, or, this little guy is strictly in the middle of this image. And so there's no sense of habitat around him. We just see him standing, kind of might be on the boardwalk, might be on a beach, don't know. And so this isn't very successful. Here's another one where lighting direction is absolutely crucial. This is another one. I'm not sure who asked about the midday light, but look at this midday light. All of this is completely washed out. It's reflecting in the eye. Even though there's a great expression on the hawk's face, the lighting is just so bad here, absolutely bad. But if we were looking at bird tonsils, this would be potentially really good, because see, we can see them right here. Okay. Okay, there are many things wrong with this image. It looks like a screenshot from a phone, but notice how low resolution this is. And also notice how teeny tiny this pigeon is compared to the rest of the frame. So really the picture is this, and that this pigeon is wearing a crust of bread around its neck like a necklace. That is the subject here, not all the grass, not all of this random foliage back here. And so this person potentially needed to use a longer lens or get closer to the bird. So, also notice how high resolution, or, how grainy it is. And so it's really low resolution image, high ISO. And so you just have to be careful of that. Okay, again, bad resolution, and your object is totally blending into the background. Okay, and so also your object is so tiny in comparison to the whole entire image that it's really hard to identify what it is that I'm supposed to be looking at. I'm more inclined to look at the lines in the colored lines in the field than I am to all of a sudden notice that there are some birds in here. So really make sure that you know what you're working with. Okay, here are some examples of bad timing. And they're all bad timing on the sense of the photographer. Here we have flamingos, lovely, beautiful, but we don't have his little toes in here, right? And we don't see where they're flying. And so this is just a little too tight. I would potentially suggest that, this photographer would have backed up a little bit and had a little bit more on the left side and been able to get the rest of the talons on the right side. This would have been a really great image because the color here is pretty decent. The middle image, the show of speed is beautiful, outstanding, but we don't have the head or the heron. It's like, come on. So they took the image a little bit late, but also, again, they're zoomed in a little too far. And I would say the same thing with the cardinal there on the right. We're zoomed in a little bit too far, so the tail is cut off and we don't have everything in the frame. His beak is cut off. So watch your edges. This is something that, I still have to do. So if you don't get it right away, this is something that you'll just have to realize that is, everyone still has to watch their edges. Okay, let me see. Okay, another one, movement. Just be careful of the bird moving versus you moving. Here, there's a little of both happening. And this one is a really good idea, but notice how the busyness of the background is kind of getting in the way of the shape of the bird. So it's really distracting. If they had used more limited depth of field, this would have been better. And then this is the final one. Please, 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 as a service, a public service, please do not oversaturate your images. We all know when you do. And it doesn't look realistic. And so, here, no saturation, but this is like way oversaturated and doesn't even look real. So please don't do that. And so there, thank you. And I just wanted to add one land acknowledgement that Detroit sits on the traditional and ancestral lands of lands and waters of, the Three Fires Confederacy. And I wanted to show my my solidarity for them and their sovereignty. So that's all I have. If there are no more questions, I can stop sharing.
Thank you. I did have, it looks like one or two just quick. One of them was
Okay.
about the apps on the App Store. They had Pro Camera and Pro Camera, one with the space between Pro and one without, and wondering which one you use, if you know.
Yeah, let me 1 second quick get my phone and I can show you the icon.
Okay. And while we're getting that, just to let everyone know, we will be sending out a recording of this. So if you missed some or had to step out and come back, you will have the full recording.
Okay, so these are the cameras that I use on my phone. And for doing adjustments free on your phone, I would highly suggest Snapseed. That is like almost like Photoshop. You can do pretty much all of the, oh, it's not very in focus. So
It's hard to see.
Lightroom, yeah, or ProCam, Halide, Slow Shutter, Obscura, Canva, and Provoke.
Great, and we can send those out in the email as well.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think there was one more question about personal recommendation for camera, but maybe we can do that after. So thank
Okay.
you so much. Just for the purpose of time, we really appreciate all of you coming today. And
Yes, thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for presenting. This has been a request we've had for a little bit, so I am so happy to have you here. And hope everyone had a great time as well. And if you have any further questions, you can reply to the email that we send out. Yeah, thank you. And then for our webinars for Detroit Audubon, we do have one coming up next week on butterflies and moths. And you'll find those on our website, on Facebook, and our Flyway Express. So reach out if you have questions, and everybody have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. And I was going to say, if Lisa is still on, she was the one that had the question about.
I am.
Okay. Would you want to ask your question?
Thank you so much. This has been great. I got in late because I was on a work call. So I have a Canon. I know you said you like Canon.
I'm a fan. Yep.
Yep. I just randomly chose it not too long, a couple of years ago. It's an EOS Rebel.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a great one. I think those are exactly the ones we have at school. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I didn't know, in terms of a better lens, and I've taken no photography courses or anything. But I love it. And I've gotten into the wildlife birding in New York City amid this COVID,
Great.
I didn't know in terms of a longer lens kind of a thing.
What do you have now, Lisa?
Okay. This is a good question. You can see my ignorance here. It says, this makes sense, 18 to 135 millimeters. Does that?
Yep.
Okay. So that's what it came with, right? And I guess the question, could you buy a longer lens for this, or what would you recommend? I mean, you see these incredibly long lenses, which is not probably in my budget set or anything, but something that I could get a little closer, I would love.
Okay, so my suggestion would be is right now you have a super amazing lens. You have a lot of ability to go from wide angle 18 is like super wide to 135, which is really outstanding. Offhand, I don't know what the next lens would be, and keep in mind you don't always have to use on brand lenses. You can use like a Tamron or a Sigma. I'm not really sure what it is that you're planning to photograph, Lisa. Can you give me a little bit more detail about what you photograph?
It's just so, for example, going to a national park with my son, going to Central Park and trying to capture birds or small that are much farther away that I can see other people can have a greater depth in their lens. So it's just, you know, it doesn't have, it just what could get me a little bit closer to see that farther away animal?
Okay, so I would suggest anything that any lens that's going to be above the 135, because it sounds like your top right now is 135.
Yeah.
Now, if you you can look around, I would personally suggest that you get a lens that has some variations. I know when I was shooting Nikon, and I could get an 80 to 200 lens. Okay. And so there's probably going to be a variable lens that you can get. However, realize that with the larger lens, it gets more heavy. And so
Yeah.
it's going to be more important. It's also going to be important for you to get a tripod, because you're going to have so many more optics in there. And as you have the longer focal length, the lens is going to actually be physically longer. And so I
Yeah.
have schmutz on my glass. And so you're going to need to balance it out with a
Okay.
tripod, or be able to hold it still. Now, the really super big lenses that I was showing in my my lecture are like 300 millimeter. And yes, they're going to get you close, but I think that is way overkill. We're talking multiple
Okay.
thousands of dollars.
Okay. Yeah, that's not in the budget. And the reason I thought this looked good is because my son is 10. So when I got it a number of years ago, it's not like I can be carrying around a big heavy thing when I was
No, it's not
managing a young
practical.
boy kind of thing.
Right.
So
Wrangling
you
him.
you actually think what I have is actually really good, and I could up it a little bit, but okay. This is really helpful to give me a perspective.
Oh, and Adele just posted like 55 to 250. Yeah, Adele, that would be a great one. I don't know how big it is or how heavy it is, but that potentially could work great, because I personally would never go down to 55. And so that would be a great all around lens.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. This has been
No
great,
problem.
and I can't wait to listen to the beginning of it on the replay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Uh-huh.
Great. Thank you so much for staying and answering that question. And I think that's all we've got. So
Okay.
thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Adele is asking. Oh, Adele, I will her contact information will be in the email that you receive. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day. Thank you.